with our guest, Sister Amina and Brother Bilal, and we're discussing the popularity of Islam. And as I mentioned before the break, I wanted to ask, because Islam is generally considered as to be a Eastern religion from the Sharaqiyin, where the word Saracens come from, as you probably know. Now, as we were talking about prior to the break, it's now spreading into the West, and it's established itself here. It's not something foreign anymore. But it's not, it could be argued, not it's not compatible with a Western culture. So, how do we play this? Should we be marginalizing ourselves? Should Islam be by the wayside and not maybe raising its head in society, or not?
I think that in a society where we enjoy free speech, that's one of the things that is supposed to be one of the benefits of living in Western society, and the architects of Western society, they boast this. So I think we're taking full advantage of our rights to give voice and opinion to particular issues, and what is the Islamic position on a particular issue. I feel, why shouldn't we share that and let the people decide? Don't think for the people. Don't stifle Islam. Don't say that people have the wrong idea if they know about Islam. So we need to regulate it and control it, and we'll speak on behalf of the Muslims. We'll have mainstream radio shows where we'll have one person representing Islam, and then a panel of say 5 that are antagonists, and we have a level of equality. No. We'll say that as Muslims we should get involved, and if you really think that it's in all sincerity as a Muslim, if you think that it's Western society is munkar and it's bad for you and it's against your deed and it's harmful for you to be here, then what you need to do. To use street talk, that you need to bounce. You need to be out of here. And if you don't think that it's a major problem, then let's just take an adult approach, a mature approach, and be involved. Not in haram, obviously, but to take part and to explain our position.
Sure.
Well, some people do view Islam as a threat, and I think it is a tremendous threat to drug dealers, to pub owners, and those people whose livelihood depends on things that we forbid. But other than that, I'm being a bit facetious here. Of course, it's not a threat in the way some people are a little bit paranoid about it. And we do find that when Muslims settle in a place, including in the West, there is a sort of second generation, third generation culture that does build up, and it's no longer a foreign culture per se, but it's sort of a synthesis of Islam and perhaps some cultural elements from other countries, and also the culture of the land. And when you talk to a Muslim who is, say, third generation, a grandchild of a Muslim immigrant, you don't really feel so much like you're talking to someone from halfway around the world. And I think this is, of course, one of the characteristics of Islam, that the religion, of course, can be maintained, but certain aspects of people's cultural approach can change, and Islam is sort of all-encompassing. You don't have to lose your religious identity to perhaps shift your cultural views one way or another. And of course, from a religious perspective, we don't prioritize one culture or another. We consider cultures are essentially equal before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unless one has a bad practice, in which we condemn the practice. It doesn't appear that Islam is really a cultural threat to the West, so to speak, because, to simplify this, we tend to become westernized. I mean, not in the negative way we use it in our community, God forbid, in terms of drinking or something, but just in terms of sort of fitting in with society, going to school, getting a job, and having a house, and living like other people. But of course, there are some areas where we can't fit into popular culture. And again, I don't necessarily think those are things that most people see as a threat. For example, the decision not to drink or go into an alcohol establishment. I mean, I don't think this is threatening to a lot of people. The decision not to date, the family values, which of course they are part of Western culture too. It's just nowadays there's a little bit confusion in popular culture about what is good and bad. But I don't think these are things that really could be seen as destructive to a society. Really, most of the things we advocate as Muslims are things we want for society. We, meaning everyone in society, they're things people think are good, whether education, earning a living, being honest, being responsible, caring for the environment. These are all Islamic values. So ultimately, Islam has something very positive to offer. And, alhamdulillah, I think Muslims have made a number of positive contributions in the various countries they have settled in. For those who've immigrated, for those who've converted, also made a number of positive contributions. And many people who come to Islam, or who sort of come back to Islam, so for example, were born into Islam, but that didn't really practice till later on in life, did say that encouraged them to really be more responsible in life, to take their job more seriously, to take their education more seriously, and to be, to be a little bit cliche, to be a better citizen. So there's really no threat from Islam, although it may be perceived that way.
Okay, so in essence what we're saying is that Islam is at home wherever Islam can be found.
I would agree.
Wherever, be that in the West or elsewhere. And that kind of leads us on to our next point, focusing again on the West specifically now. And I know it's similar in America as well, in that you have people from different backgrounds. You could be an ex-drug dealer, let's say, off the street, just, to put out there, one of a stereotype, or you could be a middle-class banker, or whatever. And the attraction to Islam works both ways. It's not that if you're a downtrodden member of society, you become a Muslim, and if you're well-to-do, Islam won't attract you. It seems to be appealing to people from all walks of life. Mm-hmm. What is it about Islam that gives it this ability to do so, do you think?
I think the complexity of Islam is very sophisticated in some areas, and like I mentioned earlier on about the social justice, or the ability Islam has to give individuals the ability to organize themselves, to conceptualize themselves in a new light, to be reborn almost, or reformed, and to modify their attitude, their thoughts, and their behaviors. Islam has this power, but also the strong intellectual tradition of Islam, the strong scholarship that exists within our history as Muslims globally. This will attract different, and there are other elements also as well that would attract people to Islam. So I think it's touching all bases. Islam there is an Islamic position, there is an Islamic opinion, there is literature, there is thought that has gone into different aspects of the human experience. So throughout the ages, there's a build-up of this material, and different individuals will find something in there for themselves. And after all, we're talking about human beings. So there's always that humanness like we spoke about before the show. While human beings are diverse in many respects, and Allah speaks about different tribes and nations and tongues and diversity, but we also share this as the sons of Adam and daughters of Eve. We share this similarity, so there's something there for everyone, really.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I would agree with that response, in that Islam, of course, is a very complex and developed belief system, and has a complex and developed intellectual heritage, as you mentioned. It is intended, we believe, by the divine to allow for people living in vastly different situations, whether it's nomads living on the Mongolian plains somewhere, or people in a very urbanized environment. However, I still think this also just goes back to the fitrah and the innate desire to connect with the divine and the spiritual, which is the same regardless of whatever walk of life we come from. It's one of those basic human needs. And so I think it just sort of calls to that. I mean, I'm just sort of reminded, for example, of the call of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam to the Hajj, which, was for all people. And yet, people come, in all types, you have people who are illiterate, you have people who are very educated, rich, poor, whatever, and yet we still sort of respond to the same with regard to the spiritual call, and we're all going to the same place. This life is very short, and the akhirah is the permanent life, and, in a sense, this life is just the preparation for the next life, and that is one of those just concerns that is common in the human condition. What happens to me after I die? How do I prepare for death, and so forth? What is the greater spiritual reality? So I think that's part of it too, just that Islam has convincing answers to the spiritual questions, which are logical and yet complex and deep too.
Okay, thank you. We've been talking about the West and the UK and the attraction to Islam that is evident, and obviously this is contributing to the rise of Islam, the popularity of Islam in the West. But if we look back to the East, and obviously when we're talking about East and West, it's not black and white, they're not definitive lines or anything like that, but just so that you can focus on where I'm taking you to, if you like.
Okay.
If we look at some so-called moderate Muslim countries, we're seeing that, at least amongst the population, if not the government, if you like, or the official international image of a particular country, and I don't want to mention any particular names, but if we look at the popularity of Islam amongst Muslims, born Muslims who have a heritage of, in some cases 1300, 1400 years, even, that period of maybe where they were beginning to doubt their deen and looking to the West for inspiration has passed. They now seem to be reverting back to Islam. What's going on here?
Well, essentially, what I think we see again and again nowadays is that as Muslims worldwide, although of course we have a lot of range in practice, from very practicing to very secularized, overall we do care about our religion, and we would like to live according to the principles of our religion. I mean, for example, it's often said that the West has really been pushing democracy in Muslim countries, and the people in Muslim countries have, generally speaking, through voting or other means, expressed that they would like Islam to be a part of their government, whether that is, a quote Islamic State or just certain legislation based on Islam, because Islam matters to us. And of course, this is a little bit uncomfortable for the Western democracy people. But the fact is, that is essentially what we want. And really this, quote, moderation, which of course is not, it's not an Islamic idea at all, in the sense that, not that Islam is immoderate in any way, but it's not considered moderate just simply not to fulfill your religious duties. So for example, taking off the hijab is not being moderate, that's just committing a sin and being not dressed to the appropriate decency standards in society. Not saying your salat is not moderate, it just means you're committing a sin and neglecting your salat. And historically in the Muslim world, it was generally looked highly on if someone fulfilled one's religious duties. I mean, you do see many of the governments throughout the early and middle Muslim world, the caliphates, which perhaps, behind closed doors, they weren't necessarily being perfect Muslims, and even people knew about this, but there was some sort of, effort to emphasize the importance of the religion, for example, to sponsor the ulama and so forth. So it's really only in these past couple centuries, like you've mentioned, that there has been this trend to somehow go away from religion, and I think that is just the legacy of colonialism and the sort of shockwaves that colonialism sent across the Muslim world. And basically it's just recovering and going back to who we really are. And I think one of the most striking things sometimes you see is just pictures. I mean, for example, there are some pictures that tend to be circulated from some Middle Eastern countries, and, with apologies, they have some ladies in some very short skirts because that was the fashion of the time. And you go to these countries now, you don't see women dressed like that in the street at all, because it's not considered decent. And even if people are not, the very, very, very into Islam people, they understand this is not part of our value system. So I think it's just going back to who we are, really.
Going back to our roots, if you like.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense when you speak about the impact of colonialism and the aftermath. It's almost like somebody being spun in a circle and then taking off the blindfolds and say find your way back home. You tend to stagger in a few different directions before the effects of the dizziness wears off, and then you can see, okay, that's where I'm heading, that's the door, and that way's home. So I think that can't be underestimated, the impact of colonialism. And this this paper that was put together by, I think it was Fukuyama some years ago, about the end of history, and when he puts forward this idea about all the major ideas have come, whether it's Marxism or Leninism or whatever, the major philosophies and religious philosophies, political positions have come, and democracy is not the best. This is what I'm not pushing that, but I'm just saying that you can't envisage something becoming more popular than democracy. And Muslims have had a chance to really study democracy and say, if it's a case of democracy or Islam, then we have to choose Islam.
Sure.
So.
And of course, I mean, I suppose the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can you can have Islam. Technically speaking, I would put an argument forward that you could have Islam and communism, but obviously the communism that I'm talking about would be regulated by Islam, and you can have Islam and democracy, and again, as long as all of the facets of that democracy don't go against Islam and so on and so forth. So obviously we need to bear that in mind. What about and I know this has been going on for quite a long time, but I wanted to focus on a demographic portion of society in the United States, specifically middle-class white women. And you're smiling. So obviously the question has been directed to you for obvious reasons. But why do you think it is? The reason why I'm asking you that question is because if I ask Brother Bilal why does he think that a lot of young black men are converting to Islam, I know that at least one of his answers is going to be justice, because they maybe have seen a system where things aren't as they seem, people aren't necessarily treated right. He may have many other answers, but that would be possibly one. But again, why would it be the case for middle-class women in America?
Well, of course, I think that is a very relevant question. I mean, the statistics, are never 100% accurate, but it's estimated that there are 10 times as many women in the U.S. who convert to Islam, and that includes white women. I mean, I think you just need to go to an Islamic center. You can usually find quite a few white ladies, but maybe one white man, if that. So it's much more common to see it among the women. Mm-hmm. And if I can rephrase your question, because I get asked it quite a bit, and quite frankly from people born into Islam ask the same question. It's kind of as if someone comes up to you and says, oh, you've got it going for you in society. You've got a lot of privilege. You're in the majority. You have all these opportunities. You can do whatever you want. Why do you want to be like us? Why do you want to give that up and sort of be an outcast and be weird with that thing on your head? And in a sense, I don't exactly know what to say to that. That is definitely looking up to people in a way that perhaps is not really reflective of their personal situation. I mean, one thing to remember, especially about a country like the US, you have a lot of people coming from very different situations, economic situations, family situations, I would say almost cultural backgrounds, because, the US is a country of immigrants, except for the Native Americans, yeah. And people have brought their cultures along, and these have sort of carried on in some ways. So it's not necessarily like it is always giving up a lot of the perceived opportunity. Also, I think one thing with regards to women, I think something behind the fact that you mentioned women is the idea that women in the West are supposed to be very liberated and very emancipated, so why would you want to, join a group which tends to be much more patriarchal in nature? And, honestly, my experience as a white female, and I'm really just going on experience here, is that you do see a very broad range of approaches to gender dynamics in white American culture and also black American culture, but we're speaking about white American culture here. And in my opinion, I think white American culture is quite patriarchal, and with respect to the man, it is all about the man, basically. Even if there's a lady, for example, who's very rich, sometimes you see her panicking because her husband's coming back and she doesn't have the right manicure, and so it's still a very male-oriented and male-dominated society. And when I was younger, I used to sometimes wonder why they say, for example, scholarships available for women and minorities. I'm like, well, we're not a minority here, but of course the discourse in the majority culture is very much directed to men who essentially do have the privilege in society. So it's not necessarily going from a great position of privilege to a position of being, at the bottom of the totem pole. Women sometimes tend to be at the bottom of the totem pole no matter what. So I don't think that's really as major of an issue as we see it. And actually, when it comes to gender roles, I do think there's a couple things some converts to Islam appreciate, because it seems like there's a couple things people are mourning in the modern West. and they are masculinity and femininity. Now, you guys can fill me in on the masculinity part. I don't have any experience with that, obviously. But, you do sometimes hear men saying they don't feel like they have the opportunity to be men. They're not going out there hunting and fishing and defending against the enemy with their swords. Even warfare is, much more mechanized nowadays. And so, Islam, it does have very, it emphasizes the importance of men behaving like men, women behaving like women, not dressing the same, and a lot of very good ideals for men and women. And this might sound a bit odd to hear me saying this, because I know we've had some discussions on some other programs where I've perhaps expressed some concerns about the position of women in our society. But I think the important thing to remember is the Islamic ideals about men are not necessarily just about being overlords and oppressing and dominating the women, but, for example, part of being a man is being chivalrous, about looking after the women in your household. Look at Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, standing up for the oppressed, defending the oppressed, defending people against the enemies. And so you do have these very strong ideals of masculinity and femininity, which are also, I think, very compatible with the modern world. And especially Muslim women, sometimes look at these ideals and realize, here's a way that I can still, be a woman, so I don't have to try to be androgynous and be like a man, and yet not necessarily be oppressed in society. So, for example, the hijab is sometimes seen, in fact, as a means of liberation nowadays. So I think this is something that's actually appreciated by many people who come to Islam. I'm not sure all potential converts really think it out, but I think it's something people appreciate once they're actually in, and, it makes them more attached to the religion.
That's quite an interesting point. Brother Bilal, how would you respond to the points the sister was making with regards to masculinity and femininity, from your own personal experience or from your own observations? Because as you know, if you like, the roles in society have been changing over the last 50 to 70 years or so. And so, maybe the lines, the defining lines have somewhat been blurred.
Definitely been blurred. Even this concept you have of the metrosexual, whatever the heck that really stands for, is a modern concept of men that are maybe a little bit effeminate, or a little bit a little bit let's say tender. But with respect to, first of all, with middle class, say for example, white American women that are attracted to Islam, or middle class women in any society, I always think about going back to the archetypal story of Islam, and I think of Khadija, and her being a businesswoman, being an independent woman, being intelligent, strong, and having a certain sort of like dynamic personality, but at the same time being the wife of the Prophet, peace upon him, and being feminine and exemplifying certain qualities that would attract women that are maybe ambitious, or come from a certain type of station in society, let's say. But with respect to men and modern society, I think the gender roles there's a lack of clarity, and Islam does give that clarity. I think an indication of how society has changed or whatever, and you speak about the hunting and the fishing and the lack of it, you find that even things like white collar boxing as like re-emerging. This whole concept of Fight Club, where that element of like male aggression, not necessarily has to be negative, but it needs somewhere to ventilate itself. Sure. So whether it's in the martial arts, it's a game of rugby, or steaming in a football pitch, but there is that testosterone level that does impact on the male psyche, the male personality, and Islam gives full recognition to that, and full recognition to the femininity, and also says that when you think of the man and the woman, that they are not mutually exclusive, because still within ourselves as men, we have there is a internal tenderness and a potential for that, and in our interaction with our wives and our mothers and our sisters, we're able to tap into that bit, that self within that is a bit more sensitive and a bit more caring, and vice versa. With women can be strong, can be direct, can be they have a masculine element also, but it's with the interaction of men that we, the yin and the yang, we gain a better understanding of who we are.
Yes. Sister, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. I mean, I think just as a community, sometimes we have a problem when we have very simplistic definitions of what it means to be a man or to be a woman, and it's not absolute, as you were saying. But I think if you really go in depth into the Islamic teachings and you see some of the things that are encouraged for men, or women. So, for example, you mentioned the reemergence of certain sports. Certain things are encouraged in our tradition, such as archery
Yes,
and
horse riding and
things
stuff
that
like
are
that. Yeah.
again, I mean, chivalrous is really the word that comes to mind. And even with women, certain things that women enjoy, such as ornamentation and so forth, they're also encouraged, but within a certain context. So the idea is, the femininity is for inside the house, but the hijab is for outside of the house. And I think actually a lot of non-Muslim women are quite surprised by this. So, for example, they might go to a Muslim country and be very surprised at the amount of attention to femininity.
Thank you very much, Brother Bilal and Sister Amina. Unfortunately, as always, whenever we delve into these discussions, we run out of time. But of course, we will, inshallah, be meeting in the future, and we can obviously elaborate and explore some of these subjects and issues in a lot more detail. Thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure once again. Thank you for watching. Join me again. Assalamu alaikum.